guys, in today's video I'm going to be showing you an extreme 3D zombie mermaid where most of her tail is actually eroded and like dissolved away. So you see those little fish bones sticking out, which I think is so cool, and it looks so dainty and so delicate while still being vicious, which is kind of a weird balance to find. So I hope you guys like it as much as I do, and don't forget to check out Helen's design. I'll put a link to hers in the description box below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
So I'm going to begin by sculpting an overlay with Cover Pink acrylic, and as I've said many times before, I love using Cover Pink as a background color, especially when there's a lot of little details and just a lot happening with the 3D art on top of it, because it just kind of disappears and it really shows off that art wonderfully. And then I'm going to file the nail into shape with my E-file, and now I'm going to start making all of those little pieces of the tail. So I'm going to bend a piece of wire into an L shape, and then I'm going to just fit that on the nail to make sure that it fits properly. And then after I have that first piece, I'm going to bend another one in another little V shape as the end of the tail for the tail fins. So glue that first one in place. Nail glue is pesky. Sometimes you got to sit there and hold it a little bit longer than you may like to. And then after you have that first piece glued down, then you're going to want to glue down that little bit of the tail fin. Hold that in place until the glue is set. So now I've made a whole bunch of smaller V shapes with a finer type of wire, and I'm going to be gluing all of those down too, and they're ever so slightly magnetic, and so my tweezers likes to get stuck to them. So that's not nail glue that's making that happen, but it's just causing trouble. So just glue and attach all of those little pieces going all the way up. This process is super tedious and just kind of a general pain in the butt, and so take your time with it and just know going into it that it's kind of a headache inducing process. So just each one going up, and then after they're all fully attached, brush a thin layer of white gel polish over them. As you can see, they start to come unglued and I had to re-glue some of them. And then after that's cured, apply some gel sealer, and now with a light minty green I'm going to start sculpting my mermaid. And so whatever color scheme you want to go with, I would just recommend finding one that you have a bunch of different colors of that shade in, or that type of color. And so if you're going to go with, the minty greens like I did, then I actually use three. I use this really, really light one, a medium color, and then one that's super dark. So if you're going to go like pink tones, which would definitely work for a mermaid, make sure you just have three versions of that color. Same thing, purple, blue, etc. So now I'm going to use a slightly darker shade of teal for the start of her hair. So that would be the one that I said was my medium color. And I'm going to just kind of sculpt basically her butt, and then her just where it like hooks on to the tailbones. And so when you're doing this, as you can see on her torso, I have like a little bite taken out. So anytime, any place where you want there to be just a little bit of exposed flesh, just take and kind of gouge out that area with the tip of your brush, and then later on you can fill that in and add some bones or whatever you need to underneath for where her zombiness is showing. So at any point during this design, if you're like, you know what, I think we need to have a little bit of blood and guts here, then you just have to take the tip of your brush and sort of take a bite out of whatever you're sculpting. So that's kind of a fun thing with this type of a design, is that you can kind of play around with it and then maybe make those decisions as you go, because you never know when the inspiration to add some blood is going to strike. So don't overthink it in the beginning is my recommendation for that type of a choice, and just sort of go with the flow. So I took the darkest shade that I have for this design, which is actually, it's more of a blue than a teal, but it's like a really dark, slightly tealish blue. And that's what I did just for that kind of border between her tail and her body. And I'm also using that color for her hair, but you'll see that in a moment. And then going back to my lighter shade, now that her torso is set up, I'm going to be adding just a little bit more thickness to her chest, just a little bit more shape there. And then I'm going to add her head, and I went for kind of an anime type of a style, which I don't normally do, but I just felt it was appropriate for this design in particular. And I'm going to be adding her head, and because I'm going for that anime look, I am sculpting her head a little bit exaggerated and a little bit larger than I would normally for the style that I usually typically do. But I kind of like to switch things up a little bit. If you guys haven't noticed that I sort of, I do things differently all over the time. So I'm going to have her hair then going, like I said, with that darker shade of blue, and just sort of take section by section and fill it out. With a mermaid, my favorite thing to do with mermaids for their hair is to make it look like it's going in a certain direction, like it's all being pushed or being carried by the water in a certain direction. I know I've seen some people do mermaids where the hair kind of flows all the way out and around them, and that's also a perfectly acceptable option. But for me, I think it just gives the design so much more visible movement and like a direction if you pull all the hair in one direction. So if you want to know how that looks. And if you're just having trouble visualizing what that would be, stand and like tip your head and look at the direction all your hair is going. And you can even like take a selfie doing that with all your hair tipped in one direction. And that can really help you. Some people just really need that visual. And if you want to just play around with the different directions, just tip your head back and forth from side to side and see how that plays out. So then you've got her arms. So for her 2 arms, one of them is kind of behind her body. So you'll only see basically from the elbow to her wrist. And then the other one you need to sculpt from the shoulder down. And for these arms, they are super thin. And so I ended up cutting them a little bit. Just the one that's the full arm, I cut it so that I could add some exposed bone in her arm too. Like I said, I didn't really have a plan for where I was putting those areas of exposed bone and flesh, and I was just kind of finding it as I went. And then after I'd sculpted the arms, I thought to myself, hey, you know what, I really need to add some bone here. So I took out my manicure scissors and just snipped one of the arms and then added a section of wire there too. So that's the great thing with these little teeny tiny skinny pieces of acrylic that are just so thin and almost potato chip fragile, is that you can easily cut them at any point if you need to. So even if you sculpt something and it's too big, it's fairly easy, as long as you're cautious, to take a manicure scissors and cut them. The one thing to remember though is that if you do use manicure scissors for things that are on a person, like some people use them for trimming cuticles and excess skin or nails or anything like that, you want to keep those separate from the ones that you use for the types of things like cutting acrylic. So also on that nail form backing, while we're here, we're going to sculpt the 2 tail fins with the medium shade of teal, and then just a random splotch of that color that is going to be for the bits of flesh that are stuck to her tailbones. So I've got those little bits that are there, and then pick up little sections and then place them down on there. It doesn't have to be perfect. This part actually, if it looks kind of almost ruffled and like it's about to fall off, that works out because the rest of this flesh is all fallen off. So there's just a little bit left, and that little section can look fairly fragile and ripped. And then add those 2 fins on there, and then I'm going to glue her arms in place. And as you can see, I have since cut them. I cut them off camera because it was like one of those instant like, ooh, I have to do this, and I did it. And then as soon as I did it, I was like, well, hey, wait, I didn't even record that. So I'm usually really good about those things, but every once in a while. So as you could see, I glued a little piece of wire as almost like a spacer in the middle of her forearm, and then I'm going to be adding that other part from, it's about like mid forearm down. And now going back to my light teal color, I'm going to smooth out the transitions between all of those different pieces, especially on the one shoulder. It looked awkward. It looked like something was glued on, which it was, so it's not really surprising. But I always love to go through and just smooth out those things so that it doesn't look quite so peculiar, and it just blends out and looks a lot more natural. And I'm gonna add a little bit more to her one boob. And now I'm going to take and I'm going to be doing all of the little details with acrylic paint. So I have a blue that's more of like just your classic prime blue, and I'm going to be doing the like her bikini top with that. And I didn't have the right shade of teal with it or for that, and I just thought, you know what, I really like this blue, it's one of my favorites, so I used it anyway. And then I'm going to add some dark red anywhere where there might be that exposed flesh. So anywhere where it transitions from bone to flesh, you're going to want to add just a little hint of that dark red. So on where her bones of the tail start, and on the tip of her fins, and then in that little area of her rib cage and her arms too. And then with white, I'm going to be adding her eyes. And like I said, I went for an anime style, partially because I think those big eyes really lend themselves towards something aquatic. They just kind of remind me of, something fishy. And so I thought that was appropriate. And I'm going to do a little bit of black outlines here and there. I didn't want to overdo the black on this design because I wanted to really do heavily monochrome with those teal shades instead of, just doing a lot of black and white extra outlines and everything. Wanted to keep it very, very blue. So there's that little bit of red that sticks out that's not in that blue teal zone, but everything else I tried to keep really monochromatic. So everything like on her tail, you can do outlines with the blue shade, and everything on her face you can pretty much do with that, arms, torso, etc. The only place, or the few places that it isn't appropriate to use that blue color, are on her hair, because her hair is just so dark already that those outlines won't show up if they are just done with the darker blue. And around her eyes, I wanted to do a little bit of the of black, just because I love to do a black outline, especially on an upper lash line. It looks so much more fierce, so much more defined. It makes the eyes really stand out, and it's just makes them a focal point, which is really a great thing to do for art just in general, is to make the eyes the focal point of any drawing or painting or character or animal, human, doesn't matter. I always like to make the eyes a little bit more intense. So I've got that, as you can see, that little bit of a black outline on her eyes, and then I'm going to take, and I did a light blue for her iris color, and then do black for the pupils. Give her some eyelashes. We want to make her look really nice and feminine. As I said in the intro, it's a weird combination of, you know, kind of like cutesy and vicious all at once, and kind of gory yet beautiful. So it's just one of those fun combinations to play around with. I added her eyebrows with black, and then I'm going to do a couple little outlines with black where it needs to have it. So that's going to be around the things that are super dark, like her bikini top, and then just here and there on that darker red too, because that's, you know, dark where it needs to have a black outline. And then on her hair. So when you're doing the outlines on her hair, you can either leave it basically where it is right now with just a couple lines going through it and calling it a day, or you can start doing what I'm doing right here, and I'm adding some shading with the black. So when you're doing shading on hair with black, you want to just create a whole bunch of little lines and sort of stop them all about the same place where the highlight or the sheen of the hair would really show. And then after you have that, then you can go through with a lighter blue and do some intense highlighting too. So you can do that really dark shading and highlighting, and it's going to make the hair look super shiny and just really bright and healthy. And especially for something underwater where those highlights and the shine of things seems to be intensified, doing that bright and dark combination on the hair really gives it just so much detail. And then still using my really light blue paint, I'm going to be adding just a couple little polka dots on her top and then on the swimsuit. Not overdoing it, but just a little bit to add some texture. And then adding the bone detail inside her rib cage where that little bit is exposed. Those little details, I think, are what really makes it, adding those little bit of bone element. And then going back to my darker blue, I'm going to be taking and doing just really quick scales. I don't know if you guys can really tell how fast I'm painting these. I'm not being too specific with their placement. I'm just basically wiggling my brush a bunch, and it gives you a very relaxed little bit of a scale texture without it looking too exact. And for a zombie, it doesn't need to look exact. It doesn't need to look, you know, overly flawless. I'm going to take some white and do a couple little extra intense highlights in her hair, just a little bit more, because you can always have a little bit more shine in hair, and then apply a layer of gel sealer over the background, what little shows. And then after that is cured, I'm going to apply some matte top coat over Miss Mermaid Zombie, and then let that dry completely before you move on to the final little touch. And for that, I'm going to apply a tiny bit of jewelry gel in her hand that's up, and then grab a sea star charm and set that right in the jewelry gel so it looks like she's holding a little sea star. And after that's cured, it's all done. I hope you guys love this one as much as I do. It could even be worn past Halloween, because even though she's a zombie, it doesn't necessarily scream only Halloween. And I will see you next time. Bye!